faithfully delivering value, unpacking great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'm breaking down a book called Learn to Debate. The subtitle is about making your arguments solid. Upon hearing this title, many might think, I'm not into debate contests. Why learn debating? Actually, if you pay a little attention, you'll find debates everywhere in life. Especially written ones are super common, like academic papers, project reports, year-end summaries, and job campaign proposals. You could say written debate is a skill everyone might use. The book we're diving into today focuses on written debate, teaching you how to articulate your views and get others to accept them wholeheartedly. The author, Alistair Burnett, is a professor at Newcastle University in the UK. Over years guiding student theses and defenses, he's distilled a whole set of effective written debate techniques. In this book, he details viewpoints, design, argumentation, structure, logic, and pitfalls of written debate, helping you grasp the essence of debate and master skills and strategies. Industry experts say this book fills a gap in academic argumentation skills education in higher ed. The translator, Wei Shumin, an associate professor at Beijing University of Post and Telecommunications, also praises the book's strong practicality for boosting written argument skills. Next, I'll split this into two parts to unpack the book's core ideas for you.
Part 1. Why do we debate?
What are the pitfalls of debate? Part 2. How to design an effective written debate. First up, let's cover Part 1, why debate and its pitfalls. Whether written or oral debate, it's defined as using reasons to state your views on issues, exposing the other side's contradictions to reach correct understanding or common ground. So, from this, we see debate can persuade others. Hearing this, some might ask, but you can persuade through speeches and communication too, right? So, what's different about debate? The difference lies in who you're persuading. Speeches and communication often happen between persuader and persuadee, while debate targets a third party outside the debaters. What does that mean? Oh, anyone who's watched debates knows both sides stick to their guns, clash head-on, and won't back down even if they're wrong. Their real goal is to win over the judges and audience to secure victory. Take, for example, a job position debate within a company. No matter how hard one side argues, they can't make the other side publicly admit defeat. But the ones actually being swayed and fiercely courted are the third-party voters, like managers or other employees. Even in the most common academic writing, the author uses a debate format with an imaginary opponent to persuade reviewers or readers to accept their viewpoint. The advantage of persuading through debate is that, while speeches can clarify a point, debate shows why some arguments matter more than others. Plus, debate fosters learning, understanding, and new idea generation. Engaging in debate transforms you from a passive recipient of others' views into an active participant. For instance, academic debates and project discussions allow gathering facts, enabling knowledge sharing that sparks new ideas. Science history is full of famous academic debates, like the heliocentric versus geocentric debate, or particle versus wave theories of light. These academic debates greatly advanced science. So, we've covered why we debate. Now, what pitfalls during debates can directly undermine their effectiveness?
The book outlines 6 debate pitfalls. I'll explain the 5 most common ones.
Whether written or oral, these pitfalls can make your entire debate collapse.
First up, circular reasoning. What's that? For example, God's existence is proven by the Bible. Then, the Bible's authority must be accepted because it's divinely inspired. That's classic circular logic. First, Proposition A serves as premise for Proposition B. Then Proposition A becomes the conclusion, with Proposition B as premise, a loop. The red flag, treating an unproven claim as self-evident truth. Circular reasoning is just the arguer talking in circles. It doesn't actually argue anything, no proof process, easily refuted. Say, why am I overweight? 'Cause I eat too much. But why do I eat so much? 'Cause I'm overweight, and we know overeating can cause weight gain. But gaining weight isn't the reason for overeating. To dodge this circular error, list your evidence and conclusions to spot missing links and avoid disconnects. Like, why did I gain weight? Because I had a major illness and was on hormone drugs. So the outcome is weight gain. The cause is hormone medication, and it's not reversible. You can't say I took those hormones because I'm overweight. That logic doesn't hold up. The second debate pitfall is ad hominem, meaning attacking the person instead of their argument.
This tactic is often unwise.
The book even says it's bound to fail. Why did they say that? Let's see an example. Xiao Li and Xiao Long from different car brands pitch cars to you. Xiao Li starts by calling Xiao Wang a liar and says not to buy his car. What would you think? You might find Xiao Li's use of personal attacks to sell despicable. You might even see Xiao Li as less trustworthy. So, to make your argument stick, tackle their reasoning head-on, not with personal jabs. Like, Xiao Li and Xiao Wang pitching again. Both claim their cars rock, but Xiao Li challenges Xiao Wang. If yours is so good, why'd you buy a different brand? Xiao Wang stunned silent. Clearly beats personal attacks. The third debate pitfall is reductionism, also called reductionism or oversimplification, a philosophical concept. Reductionism holds that complex systems can be understood by breaking them into smaller parts. But it's not always true. Take sociology. It studies human society, which is made of individuals. By reductionism, understanding each person's actions tells us how society functions. However, society's workings are incredibly complex, shaped by multiple factors like politics, economics, environment, not just simple aggregation of individual actions. And so, we can't deduce society's entire operation from individual behavior alone. Therefore, in actual arguments, not everything can be neatly broken down. The fourth debate pitfall is determinism. It claims everything happens under set conditions, predestined. Once conditions exist, outcomes are inevitable. For example, Xiaoming has a family history of diabetes. If you conclude Xiaoming must develop diabetes, that's classic determinism error. Remember, family history is just one factor. Diet, lifestyle, environment, healthcare all influence diabetes. Assuming one precondition guarantees an outcome is clearly flawed. Beyond this, genetic determinism and fatalism in daily life also fall under this pitfall. Using determinism makes the arguer seem lacking basic reasoning. It signals narrow-mindedness and lack of imagination. The fifth debate pitfall is prejudice, viewing issues through subjective bias. Attacking the person instead of the issue is a common mistake even seasoned debaters make. For instance, some Europeans think all Asians are lazy, or how people assume women drivers have higher accident rates. In short, prejudice arises when we judge others by race, beliefs, gender, or wealth. This reveals the arguer's narrowness, making their process unscientific, undermining credibility, or causing failure. To avoid prejudice, drop labels and focus on facts. Okay, let's wrap up part one. First, why do we debate? Because it persuades, fosters learning, and sparks new ideas. Second, the 5 most common pitfalls: circular reasoning, ad hominem, prejudice, reductionism, and determinism. So, how exactly should we conduct a debate? This is the second part we're covering today, also the most crucial content of the book. I'll use academic writing as an example to explain how to design an effective written debate and write a good paper. The first and most crucial step is establishing your debate's viewpoint and arguments. Now, many people tend to focus more energy and time on how to argue, often overlooking whether the viewpoint itself is appropriate. In other words, a weak argument isn't always due to flawed logic or inaccurate facts, but precisely because the argument wasn't set up properly. For example, many students write lengthy theses only to be rejected by their advisors saying, lots of content but no clear viewpoint. So what makes a good viewpoint? The author believes a good viewpoint should have substantial content. It should be a core issue under debate in your field, or one that should be focused on. The clearer and more accurately you identify the problem you're solving, the more useful and insightful your argument will be. For example, saying there are 16 methods to prevent desertification is an ordinary viewpoint, whereas stating that the two most common methods for preventing desertification only maximize effectiveness when combined with local support measures is a substitute viewpoint description. Another example, an ordinary viewpoint would say, the invention of the Cartesian coordinate system has significant importance. A substantive description could say, analytic geometry, based on the Cartesian coordinate system, unified algebra and geometry. From these two sets of examples, it's clear that ordinary viewpoints merely describe an objective fact. Broad and vague, it makes you wonder, so what? Whereas a substantive viewpoint expresses a deeper understanding of the complexity behind the facts. It's clearer, more specific, and targeted, laying a solid foundation for your argument. So, how do we establish a substantive viewpoint? The book lists 6 methods to help us establish viewpoints. The first method is identifying opposing sides. People are easily drawn to conflict in viewpoints. Thus, this method is common in academic writing. For example, the famous sci fiction novel, The Three-Body Problem, showcases the conflict between hedonism and survivalism in a post-apocalyptic setting. In this example, the conflict is between hedonism and survivalism. This makes your argument specific and clarifies the opposing sides, giving your subsequent reasoning clear focus. Establishing viewpoints. The second method is causality, where people can find logical cause and effect relationships in your viewpoint. For example, an ordinary viewpoint might state, in the near future, the climate will gradually warm. Although this sounds fine, it just describes a fact, making people wonder, so what? But using substantive causality, you could argue, climate warming might lead to human extinction in the near future. Here, climate warming is the cause, human extinction the effect. Using causality helps others follow your argument's flow. It also makes them realize the importance of your issue. The third method for establishing viewpoints starts from observation or hypothesis. It means proposing a proposition or hypothesis first, then verifying it with empirical data to draw broad conclusions. For instance, a series of shootings in New York suggests economic downturn might be the driving force, a classic observation-based argument. Schellwein was immediately speechless. This was clearly more effective than personal attacks. The third debate pitfall is reductionism, also called reductionism or oversimplification, a philosophical concept. Reductionism holds that complex phenomena can be understood by breaking them into smaller parts. But this isn't always true. Sociology studies human society, which consists of individuals. By reductionist logic, understanding each person's actions would reveal society's workings. Yet, society's workings are highly complex, shaped by politics, economics, environment, not just summed individual actions. We can't deduce society's operation from individual behavior alone. Thus, in practical arguments, not every problem can be broken down. The fourth debate pitfall is determinism. It claims everything happens under set conditions, predestined. Once conditions exist, outcomes are inevitable. For example, Xiaoming has a family history of diabetes.
If you conclude Xiaoming must develop diabetes, that's classic determinism error.
Remember, family history is just one factor. Diet, lifestyle, environment, healthcare, all influence diabetes. Assuming one precondition guarantees an outcome is clearly flawed. Beyond this, genetic determinism and fatalism in daily life also fall under this pitfall. Using determinism makes the arguer seem lacking basic reasoning. It signals narrow-mindedness and lack of imagination. The fifth debate pitfall is prejudice, viewing issues through subjective bias. Attacking the person instead of the issue is a common mistake even seasoned debaters make.
For instance, some Europeans think all Asians are lazy.
Or how people assume women drivers have higher accident rates. In short, prejudice arises when we judge others by race, beliefs, gender, or wealth. This reveals the arguer's narrowness, making their process unscientific, undermining credibility, or causing failure. To avoid prejudice, drop labels and focus on facts. Okay, let's wrap up part 1. First, why do we debate? Because it persuades, fosters learning, and sparks new ideas. Second, the 5 most common pitfalls: circular reasoning, ad hominem, prejudice, reductionism, and determinism. So, how exactly should we conduct a debate?
This brings us to part 2, the book's most essential content.
Using academic writing as an example, I'll explain designing effective written debates. The crucial first step: establishing your viewpoint and arguments. Many people tend to put more effort and time into how to argue, often overlooking whether the viewpoint itself is appropriate. In other words, a weak argument isn't necessarily due to flawed logic or inaccurate facts, but precisely because the argument wasn't set up properly. For example, many students write lengthy graduation theses, only to be rejected by their advisors saying, "Lots of content, but no clear viewpoint." So, what makes a viewpoint a good one? The author believes a good viewpoint should have substantial content. It should be a core issue under debate in your field, or one that deserves attention. The clearer and more accurately you pinpoint the problem you're tackling, the more useful and insightful your argument becomes. For example, there are 16 ways to prevent desertification. That's an ordinary viewpoint. But saying the 2 most common desertification prevention methods only work best when combined with local measures, that's a substantive viewpoint. Another example, an ordinary viewpoint might say the Cartesian coordinate system's invention is hugely significant. A substantive one could say analytic geometry built on the Cartesian system, unified algebra, and geometry. From these examples, it's clear that ordinary viewpoints just state an objective fact. Broad and vague, it makes you ask, so what? Whereas a substantive viewpoint expresses deeper complexity. It's clearer, more specific, and targeted, laying a solid foundation for your argument. So, how do we set up a substantive viewpoint? The book lists 6 methods to help us establish viewpoints. The first method is defining opposing sides. People are easily attracted to conflict in viewpoints. So, it's common in papers like the sci-fi novel The Three-Body Problem shows the conflict between hedonism and survivalism in a post-apocalyptic world. In this case, the conflict is hedonism versus survivalism, making the argument specific and clarifying the sides for focused reasoning. Establishing viewpoints. The second method is causality, meaning people can find cause and effect logic in your viewpoint. For example, an ordinary viewpoint might state, in the near future, the climate will gradually warm. Although this sounds fine, it just describes a fact, making people wonder, so what? But using substantive causality, you could argue, climate warming might lead to human extinction in the near future. Here, climate warming is the cause, human extinction the effect. Using causality helps capture attention immediately. Another example, the irrational housing boom caused the subprime mortgage crisis. The irrational housing boom is the cause, the subprime crisis the effect. Using causality makes it easy for others to follow your argument's flow. It also makes them realize the importance of the issue you're addressing. The third method for establishing viewpoints starts from observation or hypothesis. It means proposing a proposition or hypothesis first, then verifying it with empirical data to draw a broad conclusion. For instance, a series of shootings in New York suggests economic downturn might be the driving force, a classic observation-based argument. A hypothesis-based argument might be, this paper will test the hypothesis that wind power isn't commercially viable in Western Europe. The fourth method for establishing viewpoints is the keyword argumentation approach. This requires identifying interesting, problematic, or enlightening keywords to serve as your argument's focal points. For example, while gaming economy boosts GDP yearly, its impact on teens' health is unimaginable. Here, gaming economy becomes the keyword. You can develop multi-angle arguments around it. For instance, what is gaming economy? Why is it growing so rapidly? What are its effects on teenagers? Etc. The fifth method is contribution impact approach, describing an organization or event's contributions and impacts. For example, Descartes' greatest contribution to math was inventing Cartesian coordinates and founding analytic geometry. Another example, the Battle of Stalingrad was a pivotal turning point in War I-II. The final viewpoint method is comparison or context. First, comparison. Using contrasts between things to highlight phenomena and illustrate viewpoints. For instance, the U.S. government's different attitudes and approaches toward whites and blacks have intensified racial conflicts in recent years. This viewpoint contrasts treatments of whites and blacks to highlight worsening racial tensions. Now, contextual method. Arguments gain meaning within specific historical or environmental backgrounds.
For example, Malaysia's current anti-racism legislation can only be understood against the backdrop of the 1969 racial riots.
These 6 methods ensure your viewpoint targets the core argument with substance. But note, regardless of method, summarize your viewpoint in one clear sentence. Additionally, the book shares ways to make arguments more engaging. Ask yourself, what unexplored questions exist in my field? What if we change the comparison subject? How would this viewpoint fare in another context? These questions spark fresh perspectives on your argument. Also explore less discussed topics for unique arguments. You might note, this theme has been marginalized in past literature, or references are scarce. Showing your work innovates. Once your viewpoint is clear, structure your argument outline meticulously. Let me illustrate using The Language Instinct, a book previously covered on Sally's Book Talk. First, plan the macro structure. Divide into sections, 3 to 5 ideal, each addressing specific questions. Arrange logical flow and add concise section titles. The book's viewpoint. Language is an innate ability, a distinct brain module. The author structured it in 3 parts. 1. Why language is instinctive. 2. If language is instinctive, why do we spend years learning it? Third, how does the language instinct theory help us learn languages? After breaking down the main argument sections, next specify each section's content. Each section functions like a mini essay with its own introduction, body, and conclusion. For example, Part 2 of The Language Instinct opens by asking, if language is instinctive, why spend years learning it? The body then answers this through 3 arguments. First, because humans are born premature. Second, evolution made language's basic computational units instinctive, not all linguistic knowledge. Third, an innate grammar unique to one person would be useless. The conclusion reemphasizes, without language learning, 3,600, 5,400 languages could vanish by the 22nd century. Ensure viewpoints raised in your introduction get addressed within the outline. For instance, the Language Instinct intro asks why so many languages exist, answered in Part 2. With structure clarified, start writing while noting 4 key points. First, openings are crucial. State your thesis up front. Don't make readers hunt for it. Second, they shouldn't grasp your point only after 10 pages. The book stresses ideal openings. Preface or intro should be 1 to 2 paragraphs. State your thesis in 1 clear sentence. As mentioned earlier, use 1 unambiguous sentence, no vagueness. Also, directly acknowledge existing research on the topic and your stance toward it. Next, explain your article's structure clearly after the opening.
What exactly will you say?
Finally, revisit your thesis explicitly in the conclusion or penultimate paragraph, ideally with broader implications. Like in the Language Instinct script, after restating the core thesis, the author added insights from the instinct theory. First, humans are born with a universal grammar in their minds that enables us to learn language. Second, humans don't think in specific languages, they think in mentalese. Third, children should learn languages as early as possible and in an interactive linguistic environment. Above, using academic writing as an example, we've learned how to conduct an effective written debate. However, oral debates are also common in daily life. Although their considerations, structures, and argument techniques are largely similar, there are still differences. For example, the first step in oral debate is overcoming nervousness. Most people feel fear. The main reason for this emotion when speaking in public is that you might feel the situation is beyond your abilities. Therefore, Preparation for oral presentations shouldn't be rushed. If you spend a few extra days preparing, your confidence and grasp of the material will greatly improve. Additionally, adding visual aids like PowerPoint during oral debates can help ease tension. For improving oral presentation skills and techniques for using and designing visual aids, you can refer to Men, Time, the content Sally discussed earlier on the book, The Art of Business Communication for Persuading Global Top Enterprises, which won't be elaborated here. Secondly, oral debates require appropriate emotional investment. As mentioned before, debate isn't about persuading opponents, it's about winning over third parties. Therefore, to win an oral debate, you need not only strong viewpoints and arguments, but also emotional support from others, winning hearts.
The author believes that a good speech is like a performance. You should maintain eye contact, smile, use gestures fully, and even walk among the audience if possible.
That covers the main content of the book. Debate is essentially a continuous process of argumentation. The author also emphasizes at the end that argumentation shouldn't be for self-aggrandizement or superiority, and therefore, argumentation is a learning process that provides insights and enlightenment. Argumentation can be learned, must be learned, and practiced as it advances or sustains the goals and meaning of higher education. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Learn to Debate. Listening notes are below the audio. See you next time.